Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Rockefeller Center. We're so thrilled to have you here this Friday afternoon to come watch Anna Post give a presentation. We hope that you enjoy it, and afterwards there will be a Q&A session. My name is Jacob Hickson. I am a first-year fellow of the Rockefeller Center. I am a rising junior here. I am also the student co-leader for Rockefeller Vox Masters, which deals with public speaking, which is why I've been invited to come speak in front of you. So it is now my distinct honor to introduce Anna Post. Raised in Charlotte, Vermont, Anna is a graduate of Phillips Andover Academy and the University of Vermont. She holds a degree in political science and currently lives in Burlington, where she works with her family at the Emily Post Institute, which promotes etiquette and civility around the world and studies the evolution of etiquette and civility across cultures and time. The great-great-granddaughter of Emily Post, author of the seminal 1922 Etiquette, Anna Post herself co-authored Great Get-Togethers with William Morrow in 2010, and Do I Have to Wear White? Emily Post Answers America's Top Wedding Questions in 2009, and Emily Post Wedding Parties in 2007. Anna is also currently collaborating with Peggy Post, Lizzie Post, and Dan Post Setting on the 18th edition of Emily Post Etiquette, due for release this October. As an author in her early 30s, Anna approaches etiquette from a perspective that draws on tradition and history, while encouraging people to realize that etiquette is less about worrying about which fork to use, and more about treating people with consideration, honesty, and respect. A modern etiquette expert, Anna covers topics ranging from green weddings and business etiquette to politics and pop culture. A regular contributor to Routers and dailyworth.com and a guest blogger on the Huffington Post, Anna also conducts business etiquette seminars across the country, working with clients such as Emerson Process, Walgreens, Raymond Jones, and Dartmouth College. Anna has worked with companies such as Intel, The Body Shop, Princess Cruises, 3M, Hyatt Place Hotels, and Skype to promote their brands to national media. Anna also previously worked for the Motion Picture Association of America and in the Washington, D.C. office of Senator Patrick Leahy, bringing an abundance of knowledge and experience on professionalism in the 21st century to share with us today about the importance of people skills in our constantly evolving technological workplace. Please join me in welcoming Anna Post.
Thank you very much. It was a very, very warm welcome. Thank you, Jacob. And thank you all for being here on a Friday evening. I am very flattered to see so many faces here. I know there's quite a lot on the schedule here at Dartmouth this weekend, so I appreciate your interest in the subject. It's a really fun one for me, so I can certainly get going talking. I am going to stop at 6 so that we can do our Q&A then. Normally, I really like to have a lot of Q&A during the program. However, in the interest of time, and since we do have time set aside for Q&A this evening, there's a few places throughout the program where I'll ask for a little audience participation. Beyond that, I think I will hold some of the Q&A until afterward. But for the places, I'll make it clear where I'm asking for some of your input and to chime in as well. I think with that, we will go ahead and get started. Professionalism in the 21st century. Working at the Emily Post Institute, we spend a remarkable amount of our time talking about what's new in etiquette. We don't spend as much of our time rehashing where we have been. We all kind of have that down, and we're happy to talk about it and happy to talk about where tradition comes from and some of the older traditions that we still hold on to today. But the place where the conversation gets really interesting is when we start taking a look at all of the scenarios that Emily, my great-great-grandmother, never could have known about. I think she would have been very interested in them, by the way. She had a wonderful sense of humor. She really thought that time should move and evolve. She was a very modern woman in that she was an author and a single mother at a time when that was not always socially acceptable. So I really think that for all that there's that phrase out there, what would Emily Post think? To me, that's always a funny phrase because I think she'd probably think most of these things were just fine. So I thought I'd share that perspective with you before I completely got going to let you know that for me, the idea of moving forward is not a radical one. It's actually one that she instilled in a lot of her writing to begin with, and it's something that I think I feel very proud, I should say, to get to carry on and to think about it as something that is living. It's often a reflection of our society, and that should move and change, and so the etiquette around it should move and change too. To that end, I want to ask you all a question from a poll that the Associated Press and Ipsos did a little while ago. The poll asked, Are Americans ruder today than 20 or 30 years ago? By a show of hands in the room, what do you think? Are we ruder than we were a generation ago? Yes, I see quite a number of hands going up around the room. Typically, about the same number in the rooms when I ask this question reply. About 70% of people say yes to this. It's an interesting question. I see both sides of it. I think that we perceive a difference, and you are right in doing that. I just described that things do change. What you grew up with as normal, traditional manners, some of those shift and change as you get older. I think that's what generates the phrase, kids these days. I think that's a natural phrase. I think that's been around for a very long time. I was reading a biography of Shakespeare by Bill Bryson not that long ago, and he talked about someone in the 1500s saying, "What's going on with youth today in London? I cannot believe it." So I think this concept is an oldie but a goodie. I also think that if you went back generation before that and asked the same question, you'd get the same answer, and back again and again and again. But I do also think that within this, it is a question of how you are looking at it. And that real perception that you feel, while it may be very explainable, is still a very real feeling. We're going to look at a little bit of intergenerational etiquette tonight as well. And I think it's just a good reminder to be aware of this. I don't see this statistic as right or wrong. I see it as something that just needs to be taken into account when we're considering etiquette today. I like that the poll then asked on a frequent or occasional basis, do you encounter people using their cell phone? We'll include smartphones now in a rude or annoying manner. Show of hands. Yes, essentially, who does not see this happening? Apparently 11% of people. I would really love to know who they are and where they are and why they do not see this happening. Yes, we all pretty much see this around right now. What I like is that they then asked, have you used your cell phone in a loud or annoying manner in the past few months? Quite a few brave souls. I think I heard an "of course not" somewhere in the room. It's very possible, and I am an etiquette expert. My last name is Post. This is my job and career on the line. It's very possible that I did this in the last few months. The kicker for me with this, by the way, 8% of people admitted to doing this. I think you see the humor there. I think you see the fact that this question is all about awareness, the ability to see your own actions the way they affect other people, and to see those to see that clearly. Today is not an exploration into the rudeness within. That being said, the ability to see ourselves with clear eyes is very important. Etiquette for me, if I had one sentence to say to all of you, sometimes doing media work, I only have one sentence. That message is it's about how our actions affect those around us. Bottom line, how it impacts other people. And taking, I think, obviously, that into consideration in a way that produces a good outcome is what we're looking at. I don't think that 89% of people are seeing 8. I don't think that that makes sense. That's why I think this is about awareness instead. But I also will tell you that having done this job for a number of years now, I also think this is about intentions. I don't think the majority of people wake up in the morning intending to be rude to each other. I don't think that's where it's coming from. Are there a few people in this world who maybe have it out for others? Sure, yes, there are some of them. On a whole, I don't think that's the case, that someone wakes up and says, this is my agenda for the day. How may I be offensive in as many ways as possible? It doesn't make sense to me. What happens is when we perceive different expectations, when we have different expectations of each other and that behavior doesn't meet up, we often perceive rudeness. Or when people are unaware about how their actions are affecting others, we get annoyed because they're not paying attention to the group, a group that they are out and about and participating in, whether it's in public, in business, in lectures, you name it. What I'd like to do is, I often put this one to the audience. In the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and answer it. Why business etiquette? This is a question that when I am out there teaching to corporations, I know that sometimes in the audience people are thinking, I have an awful lot to do today. Why am I in a class about business etiquette? What's going on? First off, I don't think that this is 101. I don't think that this is the first time that anyone here has ever heard this before. This is a chance to sort of refresh and reinvest. But why business etiquette matters, that these companies are willing to fly me in and take time out of a day to spend time on this, there's a lot of answers, but I think in part it's so that the individuals can be successful, so that they can be successful representing their organization. And when the organization is successful, it comes back again to the individual. Etiquette for me is about how I've mentioned it's about interactions. Interactions are often about relationships. And when it's business and we're talking about people that we know, it is about building good relationships with those people. So for me, all the things that I talk about are there to support your abilities, your potential, the skills that you have in a way that allows you to advance the relationships that you have in business so that you can advance those agendas, so that you can grow in those skills and see those be recognized. I want to jump into workplace professionalism. That's in part what we're here to talk about today, professionalism in the 21st century. And to that end, I thought a little bit about really calling out all the material that I have and looking at some of the things that Emily would not have seen back in her day. So for the most part, we're going to be looking at where there are some changes, where there are some new things that come up, because as I just said, those new things are often where we find friction. To do this, I want to start by sharing with you, and this came up in the introduction, what I consider to be principles of etiquette. Now, I can spend up to an hour talking about this. It's a very conceptual thing. It's a lot less about the nitty-gritty. But for me, every manner that's out there, from shaking hands with someone, to saying please and thank you, to writing a thank you note, to offering a chair to someone who might need to have that chair when they are on a bus or a subway car, you name it. All of those actions are wonderful, respectful, considerate actions. That's the whole point. Those actions are there to show that you are a considerate person. It's almost sort of a stand-in for that. In fact, what was really interesting, actually, let me put these up here just so that you can see the ones I'm talking about. These, for me, are the fundamental principles. When I get asked a question about etiquette that I've never heard before I give an answer, be it to an individual, a client, to the media, I make sure that I'm checking these 3 boxes in my answers to people in any kind of sticky situation that they may have. So when I'm thinking about these kinds of words in a sense of the manners that we have, that these principles are behind all of them, handshakes is a fantastic example. For the last couple of years, we've had some kind of an outbreak of something. H1N1 and swine flu are the same. Bird flu is the other one, right? They're getting a little bit mixed up in there. You get the idea. And we were getting a lot of interview questions from people saying, how do we shake hands? This thing that is so essential to how we interact as a society, this box we need to check to show that we're being respectful of the person that we're meeting. I don't want to get sick. I need to be respectful of myself, too. It's interesting, we didn't wind up making up any new etiquette for this. We reached to something that we've used before, which is when we advise people from, for example, cultures where women don't shake hands as part of their culture, but yet they're visiting a culture where that's normal and they don't want to give offense. That's when I would recommend going to the verbal. It's a pleasure meeting you. Excuse me for not shaking hands, but I'm so happy to be here today. That instead keeps the focus on what the handshake would have said, which is, it's an honor to meet you, it's a pleasure to meet you. Say that with words, even though you cannot perform the action. That principle to me is more important, and so if it can't be done, the verbal nod instead. As I said, these underpin a lot of things. I like starting with this when I'm talking about professionalism, because to me, to be able to weave these 3 things into everything that we do, for example, weeding out maybe the little white lies at work, or making sure that I am genuinely being considerate, even of a colleague who is maybe not my most favorite person, is in part the definition of professionalism today. That when you apply your skills and you apply these 3 principles, that's what it means to be a professional. We're going to break it down into some of the different places that you find these things. But I don't think that etiquette is around so that we can just talk about the weather. I think that would be tremendously boring. I think that these things allow us to talk about all kinds of things, from our normal day-to-day job topics right down to the difficult and the contentious. But I think it's a place that we need to go sometimes in business. The other thing that I want to say as I sort of set up the whole general conversation is, I mentioned before about people's good intentions. When it comes to business, so many times the questions that I am asked or the situations I'm presented with, to me, I can see immediately where the problem is. It's because one person is intending something really good and the other person isn't perceiving it. It's not quite matching up. It's not working. And it's not that that person's actually meaning to be rude or is a big problem. that famous phrase, what we have here is a failure to communicate. And for me, when that's happening, then that's the time to reevaluate and ask this question. Is what I'm intending to get across, is what I'm intending to do, is the action, the intent that I had behind that action, is it actually what that person, are they picking up what I'm putting down? Because if they're not, I might need to try again. And that doesn't mean that you're a failure as a professional or that other person is oblivious. It just means that we are different people with different methods of communicating. So it's worth revisiting this question when you feel like there's maybe a little ship in the night situation happening. 4 generations, 1 office. That is what is going on right now. I've heard it called both the silent generation and the GI generation, the World War II generation. We have the baby boomers who are out there. Gen X, which I'm very happy is no longer called baby bust. I think Gen X is a little bit nicer. And we have millennials, who some of you may have heard referred to as Gen Y before. Millennial seems to be where it's landing right now. Those generations in the workplace together, I think, is almost one of the most interesting dynamics as a place for perceived rudeness. I mentioned that manners change, but we still have that very real idea of what we grew up with as being kind of the correct way, the right way of doing something. Well, you get 4 generations with 4 different ideas about what the right way is, and it can get complex very, very fast. These are 5 of the stickiest spots that I see come up between generations. Technology. Millennials are the first generation. I'm at the very tail end of Gen X, by the way. I was mentioning to somebody before the program that I had my first really using email probably in my early college years. Getting on the internet was a big deal my senior year of high school, and I got my first cell phone, I think, my senior year of college. So just to give you an idea, for students today, that's just unheard of. I mean, this is just something that's been natural since you were 11, 12, 13. This is the first generation to grow up really fully integrated with this type of technology and social media and connectivity and sort of remote access to each other. And that's a very strange thing when someone is watching 2 people text to each other rather than talk. I still find that strange. I associate a little bit more with Gen X, and I find it strange, but yet it is another communication device in between those 2 people. When that expectation is the same, then it's a perfectly valid one. But in business, you are not always working with your generation. So as soon as you are sort of stepping outside that, and no, you don't have to go look up dates and try to figure out how old somebody is. I think we all know how to perceive this one. As soon as there is any question of that, I will probably tighten up my language and defer to the formal. And by the formal, what I mean is if I'm sending an email to a client, actually, if I'm sending an email to a client, period, I treat it more formally, actually. We'll just get that one right out there. But within generations, it's worth sort of tightening up language a little bit. Language is another place where people really perceive a big difference. When I was a kid, it was everybody saying like. Well, it's like this. Well, no, it's like all the time. It's like. Comes up a lot now. Tendency is also in generations to end a sentence as though it's a question instead of actually stating a fact. These are differences within these generations. Personal image and attire, I think that one's pretty obvious. I'm not going to strike home an awful lot on it. Feedback is one that's interesting. Actually, let's talk about multitasking first. Multitasking, in part, is related to technology. There is a lot of debate about whether or not all of the multitasking people do with devices is really actually effective or not. I am not going to try to settle that debate here. I've seen studies that show both ways on it, that yes, you can accomplish a lot, or yes, you're accomplishing things, but not quite as well as you would be if you actually focused on the task. Interestingly, a lot of offices are turning to policies that say you can check your email at 10, 2, and 4. You can have no cell phone at all. You have to drop it off and check it in when you show up at work because we don't want you, have you ever heard the phrase social not working? We don't want you texting to people all day long. Some studies have shown that up to a couple hours a day can be lost in productivity from people doing this. I think that's on the extreme end. I think those are the outliers. But I do see this integration of things like texting, checking in on Facebook for a minute or 2 while you're in between tasks at work as sort of more of a flex time multitask that is coming up more with younger generations. That being said, have I ever checked a text message from my boyfriend reminding me to get milk at the grocery store on the way home? Yes, I have. Even I am part of a generation that's starting to do that. However, I've also seen my father do that with a text from my mother. So, this isn't always relegated generationally. Feedback is a really interesting one. This is what I'm getting at here is the idea that younger generations in the workplace are looking for more interaction with their supervisors. They are looking for more feedback from their supervisors, sometimes in the form of approval and encouragement, and sometimes just in the sense of interaction. Generationally, for millennials, this is probably the biggest thing that I hear about from my clients in the workplace, is those two differing ideas of how much attention a supervisor is giving to an employee. And that is a big characteristic of this generation. The communication, the feedback, the two-way exchange of information. There's a lot of positives to that, but it is a very different approach to communicating than the generations that came before it. So I have been seeing some friction in that area. Like I said, these are all just really good ones to be aware of. It doesn't mean that you have to change who you are, or excuse it, but I think it can really help bridge some of those differences when we're able to recognize it for what it is and take it into account rather than just feeling that friction. Bad language is one that I want to mention. It's been a little bit less in the news lately, although I hit a real hot button with it. It was actually terrific because it made a great point at a client site recently. But bad language, when you bring this up in an office place, this is from a ladders.com survey, 81% of senior executives say that bad language in the workplace is completely unacceptable, as do employees. Those are pretty high numbers for a poll. Yes, coast to coast, regionally around the US, this can differ a little bit more. But on a whole, I hear language in offices sometimes I'm really surprised to hear, given how upsetting it can be for some people. Language, by the way, is not bad language in the office place. It's not just simply what the FCC would not allow to be on broadcast news. It can sometimes be considered, and different people have different feelings on this one. I'm not going to cast any judgments on this. I'm just going to let you know that there can be real perceived rudeness with use of religious phrases, statements of, taking the Lord's name in vain, if you will, things like that. Even the use of, pardon if it offends anybody, damn, D-A-M-N, can be offensive to others, depending on how it is used. More often than not, I think there's no intentional rudeness meant with it, but that's a place where talk about perceived different expectations, and it can really grind some relationships to a halt. Business etiquette today is gender neutral, and this is always a very, very, very interesting topic when I am in the South. And not always the South. There are a lot of people all over the country who relate to some of these sort of gendered social behaviors as something that they're really personally attached to. And I don't, by the way, see them as wrong at all, but in business, it's important to recognize, this is the phrase that I really like, thinking about it this way, not doing anything with a member of your own sex that you wouldn't do for someone else. So for example, if you wouldn't hold a chair for another man, you might think twice about holding it for a woman these days because it's singling her out based on her gender. Some women really like it, others really don't. And so others don't really care one way or the other as well. But given that in business it is not your responsibility to do this, it's probably worth not potentially hitting a button. Some other ones that come up, for example, holding a door, I think is great. I see men hold doors for women. I see women hold doors for men all the time. That's a very easy one for us to absorb as just simply being considerate of another person rather than singling out by gender. Now, I also don't want to say across the board that we just toss all of this away. Socially, yes, absolutely continue. In business, if you really feel uncomfortable letting this go by the wayside as a man, then I would recommend that you ask instead of just preemptively doing this. May I hold your chair? May I help you with your coat? This is a way that you can reconcile those two things while paying respect to the woman's choice, because now you know what her preference would be. The only one that is tough to do this with, and it doesn't really come up, I think, here in the Northeast, but in the South, where many of you who are students may be working, many of you may have roots there, and the South I consider quite broad, by the way, is the phrase ma'am. It's one that I recommend. Ma'am is there. You're not going to say, may I call you ma'am? You're not going to ask about that one. So instead, I would recommend saying Ms. Post. It expresses a sense of respect and formality that is the same, but it doesn't touch on the gendered issue that is there. I bring this up because I had a client once come to me and say, it's interesting you brought it up because I got in trouble once with a client. I was respectfully calling her ma'am and was told a day later that I was off of this client's work project because she was so offended I was doing it. Now, I think that's more of an outlier, but I raise it just to illustrate the point that there are mixed feelings on it. My goal with all of it is to help people who are looking to be respectful find a way to do that that doesn't leave them in a guessing game, which is why I would recommend Ms., for example, in that case. Some general office manners, I want to run through these quickly because I think they're worth mentioning, but I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on them. These are the things that often fall by the wayside. They are the biggest complaints that I often hear from workers in an office when these things are not happening. I'm going to go ahead and put them all up at once. Greeting each other, I added with a smile here, but basically saying hello to each other in the morning, is what we're talking about. There in some offices is a lot of debate on who should say hello to whom first, the person who is in the office or the person who is coming into the office. I don't care. Someone say hello to someone, please. Just be natural about it. It really does not matter. What's key is that you're acknowledging that person. We said that there's a respect behind these actions. It's acknowledging a coworker and saying hello to them. A smile is obviously warm and welcoming, and I think most of us would like to work in that kind of an environment. Respecting privacy, I think that's fairly obvious, whether it's knocking on a closed door or not over-listening too much or sharing information you heard when you're in an open office environment, and privacy is sometimes at a minimum. Full attention. Attention is one of the biggest ways in business that we can show respect to another individual. I think it's why people get so annoyed by people text messaging while they are talking in a conversation with them. If I'm sitting here doing this and you don't have my eyes and you don't seem to have my full attention, even though I think I'm giving it to you, the perception is I'm not paying attention to you. And when I do that, I think I'm diminishing the respect that I'm giving to you as well, which is why I think it's important to put away the phone, put away the BlackBerry when you're with another person. Or in a meeting, giving the meeting your full attention. Otherwise, frankly, why are you in that meeting? That's maybe not the best and highest use of your time to be there. Identify yourself on the phone. It's a pet peeve I hear a lot. We'll just check that box by putting it up. Pick up after yourself, same thing, in common areas, etc. Keep cell phones. These are some ones Emily wouldn't have dealt with. Cell phones to, I said silent and not vibrate because frankly, vibrate on a desk or in a drawer can wind up making more noise than it does when it actually rings. Not that I'm completely against vibrate, but just avoid the fact that it can create a lot of noise, please. Personal calls in a private area, shared calendars up to date, including personal appointments. You don't have to say what it is, but people need to know that you're not available during that time. In fact, probably best if it is a personal appointment, I don't necessarily want to know about my colleague's bikini wax. So if you could please just mark personal appointment and you're not available during that time early on a Friday morning, that would be great. Thank you very much. Please and thank you in emails. People want to see this. The argument I hear on the counter side is, well, it's their job and they're supposed to do it. Yes, that is absolutely true. But in society, the way that we have this, it is a courtesy and it's one worth spending. It doesn't cost you anything to throw in the please and the thank you. I have some spectacular stories. I wish I could share them. Fridge rules, if you put it in, you can take it out. That's it. If anyone wants to hear them, you can come find me afterwards. There's some doozies out there. What I'd like to do now is move into communications more specifically, so email, cell phones, and then we're going to look a little bit at social networking and a little bit of business social situations. And if there are any other cell phones in the room, if we could silence those as well, that would be terrific. This is very apropos for what we're talking about right now. This question fascinates me because it seems so easy at first. You've invited a major client to lunch at a high-end restaurant with a no cell phone policy. I put that in there. This could almost be any restaurant these days, but it's mostly that I wanted to focus people to the fact that, yes, definitively, we are no cell phones here. A cell phone rings and your client answers it and starts having a conversation. You realize that other people are looking and they are annoyed. What would you do? This is a question that I sometimes spend a good bit of conversation on with people because it raises a bunch of different points. Among these, client management, you don't want to potentially embarrass the client. Why would it be embarrassing? They might not mind at all that you say something, but you're essentially schooling them a little bit. You know, you shouldn't have that out. To correct somebody can sometimes embarrass them. Other people appreciate it. I have a feeling if we're doing this kind of behavior, we're a little clueless to start with and may not appreciate the correction. The interesting thing with this question is every single time I teach it, I get a divided room. There are some people for whom they would say something, no cell phone, take it outside, that kind of a thing. And they would quietly gesture or even slip a note. I hear that one a lot. No cell phone, sorry, I forgot to tell you. Even though they should have known. That's a courtesy line right there. And that's great. Sometimes I get people going with convoluted answers, like get up and go to the restroom and have the maitre d' come back and deal with it for you. Sure, you could do that, but I think it's a little bit convoluted, and I think most of us should be able to be confident enough to do something in between. Other people tell me I would just sit there, or I'd excuse myself to the restroom until they are done. Get out of Dodge, not correct. They will never, ever correct a client. Client is king, client is queen. That is it, end of story. And it's interesting to me because I will accept both answers. I think that either one of those are okay. You are not actually the person doing this rude act. However, my preference is to ask the person to hang up the call because it is annoying other people. I think that's the best action to take. As I said, depending on the relationship, there are some people whose judgment tells them this just isn't right for them to do. And you should follow that. You have to be able to be genuine to it. But I really like this question because of some of the correction issues that it brings up and the fact of what is that kind of a relationship. The first question I get is, how well do I know the client? What kind of business is this? Because it's going to determine their answer. And those kinds of questions are important and appropriate. Etiquette is not always one size fits all. Our judgment, looking at a relationship, once we have taken the time to be aware and ask that question, is a really important part of the process. A couple of smartphone tips. I think most of us know these at this point. If it will bother other people, it should be off or silent. If you have to take the call, step away. The number of times I'm in an airport traveling to see a client, and all of a sudden the person next to me takes a phone call and I'm hearing all about whether or not they should get another cat, I can't even tell you. When there's a big airport, you could move to another spot. How about that? Beware of using a BlackBerry or a smartphone in a meeting. I'd even add iPad to here at this point. What I'm talking about is, one, that attention factor that we're talking about. And also, maybe you're really using it for work. I heard about a guy once who got in trouble with a client because his boss had even said, I'd like you to be using your BlackBerry. This was a couple years ago when this was a little bit newer. He said, I want you to be taking notes on the BlackBerry while you're there today. Use this new technology. This is great. The person's client was really upset. Why was your person there and not paying attention throughout the whole thing? Well, we talked about intentions and perception already. I'm not going to go through that again. It was really interesting to me instead, what I would recommend, maybe you are using an iPad in a meeting to take some notes. Guys, I'm going to use the iPad to take some notes today during the meeting. Just letting people know a new usage expectation up front. And then obviously sticking to it because we need to trust that we're not playing Words with Friends or Angry Birds during the meeting. I don't know if any of you caught the spate of articles in the New York Times about that a little while back, but trust with these devices is important too when we are using them for legitimate uses. I saw a hand up over here.
I take notes with my phone.
That is A-okay in this setting here today. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. One of the things that I think is also kind of interesting is laptops in meetings these days, especially for students here who may be using laptops during class. I could appreciate potentially a professor's frustration or a meeting leader's frustration knowing that some of my attendees might be doing things other than classwork while they are on their computer. And this came up at, it came up in a staff situation at another university. It was not with students. So this is not just a student question that can arise. It was interesting. My recommendation is to announce at the beginning of meetings, please minimize all windows that don't pertain to this meeting. I've now set a fair, neutral expectation up front with my attendees that I expect to be adhered to. And if I'm walking around and I see it's not, I have a lot more ground to stand on when saying, you know, please minimize that if you would. I'd appreciate your attention. That's a fair thing to ask for. And as we have new technology, whether you like the fact that we need to verbally address that, that is how we as a society will adapt. I do a lot of work with Intel on mobile manners, and I've worked a lot with their cultural anthropologist, a woman named Dr. Genevieve Bell. She's fascinating. I could talk to her all day. And one of the things, the biggest takeaways that I've taken from her is that culturally, society right now is creating technologies faster than we can fully adapt them into our normal expected social usage. So cell phones, for example. In fact, some of these are even starting to become obsolete before we've fully gotten used to them, which is also really, really interesting. It's why we've gone from complete cell phone anarchy to the fact that most of us know we can't use a cell phone in a restaurant. We know we can't use it in line at the pharmacy. We know we can't use it in line in locker rooms. In settings like this, we know that that's what's expected. Movie theaters, society is deciding what usage we'll accept so that we can enjoy the technology other places. Because at the end of the day, technology isn't rude or polite. It's us, and it's how we are choosing to use it that really makes the difference. I'm going to put up a couple email tips. A lot of times I really love to do some, this often springboards, we don't have time for it tonight, I wish we did. This often springboards off of some fantastic email examples that I have in my little library of trouble that people have gotten themselves into by sending something out that they shouldn't have. Did anybody, it's not quite business, but did anybody hear about the mom in Britain a little while ago who sent an email to her daughter-in-law to be that was just the worst email that you have ever read? It is horrible, saying how this young woman is rude and she didn't do this and she didn't do that during a weekend visit and she better go take some etiquette lessons. Well, guess what the daughter did? She forwarded it to her friends saying, can you believe I just got this? And guess what they did? They forwarded it to a lot of other people. And now all of us have read about it. The kicker is, I have no idea what this young woman's behavior was. Given the source, I'm a little suspicious that it was really this bad. The stepmom-to-be actually listed some things that I would agree with. Whether or not this young woman really adhered to them or not is a whole other question, but how she chose to do it was just a disaster. It also highlights the fact that email just simply is not as private as we always think it is. Do you have a reasonable expectation within the trust of your colleagues? Yes, you do. But at the end of the day, any email can be forwarded at any point and can wind up in the New York Times like this one did. Let it simmer is here for a reason. There have been a few times in my professional career that I have sat on an email for an afternoon, even come back to it the next morning. It's only happened a couple times where I was pretty annoyed about something and I wound up deleting it. While it might have been great to vent it, I'm glad I didn't send it. You can also have somebody else read it out loud. That's one of the best ways to hear the tone of the email and is this really acceptable? But being able to tamp down, it's not that it's wrong to be upset about something in business, but you want to make sure that you don't sound hot-headed and that you're willing to stand by that email 5 minutes later when perhaps your temper has cooled a little bit. Subject line is your first impression. Not a lot to say except for 3 things. One, have one. Have it be appropriate to the conversation. Hi is my least favorite subject line out there. And I'll tell you, when I teach to senior executives in C-suite, I get a lot of nods on that one. It's not looked on in a friendly way in business. It's a friendly message, yes, but it's not a very helpful one in business. So find something apropos to the conversation and then spell it correctly. And that's about the end of it with subject lines. Grammar and word choice matter. Again, I'm not going to harp a lot here except to say that in an age of text messaging and autocorrect, there are some spectacular games of Mad Libs that can occur with messages being sent to people. Some of them really pretty outre. So it is worth a reread. My client, my boss, my colleague is worth a reread if I am thinking that text message is the appropriate medium to be in touch with them. And it's not always, by the way. Asking that question is what will probably get you to the right answer. Thinking about who the recipient is. What generation are they? Are they a client? Are they a formal client? Those will help you know whether maybe it's worth an email instead. Oh, and the other one that comes up, this just absolutely cracks me up. Has anybody gotten an email from someone? It's sent from a text, from a phone. Please excuse any mistakes in this message. It was sent from my BlackBerry. It was sent from my iPhone. It was sent from my Droid. I think that is horrible. You can certainly say, sent from my iPhone. I don't mind that. That can help put you on the map and be a good way to communicate with people. But please excuse any mistakes. That's sort of like washing your hands and saying, it's not my fault, it's the device. Well, no, it's not. I'm the one who could have reread the message and made sure. I'm notorious, by the way, in text message for leaving out entire words. So it's definitely worth that reread. Be conscious of voice. This speaks to email as well as to texting. I think most of the millennial generation knows no all caps. My generation, it was pretty common to see this at one point in emails. It actually came from a keystroke saving thing a long, long time ago that we really just don't do anymore. But a message in all caps really is shouting. So unless you are shouting congratulations to somebody, this is probably not a good idea. Not that you can't be upset with somebody, but if you are, you need to be able to go and speak calmly, not shouting, to them in person rather than over email. Emoticons, unless you know 100% that the person you are sending it to will perceive it well, it will look juvenile in business. That's just simply a fact. It's something I've seen be confirmed by pretty much every client that I have ever taught to. So save them for friends, save them for colleagues with whom you are friends and situations that is appropriate. Text message speak, I think in business, a client, it's worth spelling it out for. Half the time, generational differences, people don't know LOL, they don't know TTYL, LMK. Let me know. That one took me a minute the first time I saw it because the K doesn't phonetically sound the same. So that one was kind of interesting. I get my mom the other night, I confirmed to her, no, Mom, LOL isn't lots of love, it's laugh out loud. So I mean, there's even confusion about what they actually mean. So last thing, salutations, signatures, closing blocks. Do use on the first back and forth with email, salutations and closings. Dear, hello, hi. Good morning, good afternoon. For salutations, I think we know which ones are more formal. I would avoid hey. I don't personally have a problem with it, but I've had a number of clients mention that they don't hear, hey, Anna. They hear, hey, Anna, almost like a jab. So for me, I have hi as a perfectly good casual alternative. That's the one I'm going to use instead. Closings, the list is huge here, but sincerely is fine. I get people worried that it's actually not sincere to say sincerely since it's what we've all been taught to just use as the default. It is okay to use sincerely. In fact, it's probably your safest bet. Best wishes, best regards, kind regards, all of those combinations, thanks again, thanks much, those are all great. Take care if you're not going to be talking to them for a while. Depending on your relationship, reach to these. Warmly, warmest, warm regards, cheers, I would be a little bit more careful with, depending on the business and the industry and the relationship that we're talking about here. Normally, I would sort of steer a little bit more away from those. However, I've gotten emails from my publisher signed XOXO. So, depending on the industry, what comes in, I can't control, but that's not what I'll probably be sending back out. Editor, excuse me, magazine editor, not publisher. Signature blocks do have one at the bottom, but that does not stand in for you signing your actual email. So I'm going to say thanks, comma, Anna. And then you'll see Anna Post, author and spokesperson, the Emily Post Institute. Think of that signature block as your letterhead on a piece of paper stationery. You wouldn't go through the whole process of typing up a letter to somebody and then fail to actually sign it. It's that personal sign-off. If you'd like to make Anna at the bottom and then Anna Post all part of your signature block so it's there, do so. Just make sure that Anna, that's your sign-off, matches the type that you're in, or else the jig is up and everybody knows that this is sort of not a sincere sign-off. That's part of the personal touch that is still part of email. These only need to be there on the first back and forth, those salutations and greetings. After that, yes, it becomes more of a conversation and it drops off. You don't have to be on your 15th reply, Dear Tim, yes, 3 works. Sincerely, Anna. We can condense it to a conversation at that point, and that is fine. Social networking. I want to shift gears into this. I'm thinking about this less as your work usage at the moment. A lot of people use Facebook, use Twitter, use LinkedIn to promote their business. I'm going to talk about it more in the sense of your personal usage and how that can interact with your professional life right now. You open your Facebook account and see a friend request from your boss. You feel uncomfortable accepting, but you don't want to offend them. What do you do in this situation? This I'll actually put to the group. Anybody want to answer? I'll repeat back for the microphone.
Accept and limit.
I heard accept and delete. Ignore.
Have two Facebook accounts.
Have two Facebook accounts. You better hope they picked the right one to friend, but yes, I hear you, yes.
Ask them to LinkedIn.
Ask them to LinkedIn, yes.
They have now they have a button you can click that just says not now, so that it's not ignoring them, but they'll just think that you don't check your Facebook or something.
A button that says not now. And by the way, that often works a little bit like the ignore button, but yes, the effect is sort of the same, but I think a lot of people prefer to hear not now than ignore.
You can choose now exactly what setting or what version of their Facebook you see, like what version of your Facebook they see.
You can control the amount that they're able to see on your page so that you can sort of manage that. Now, you do sometimes have to keep up with Mark Zuckerberg and what he has most recently done to privacy settings, but yes, that is very true. Google Plus, which is, may grow in popularity to compete with Facebook, may not, has a circles feature where you can kind of put people into different slots that pre-assigns what those people can see. So they can be in your work circle. It's almost kind of like a mix. Facebook is starting to come up with something a little bit like it. We'll see if it catches on. One of the interesting things about the ignore button that makes it so hard for people to filter out relationships they might not think are appropriate for this spot, not because the boss has done anything wrong, by the way, it's just your personal preference, is because it's that word ignore. We've been taught not to ignore people. That's a rude thing to do. Think of the not now or the ignore button as a filter, and it is okay to use that filter. The answer is every single one of you are correct. There is no wrong answer. Very much like being in the restaurant, it has to be comfortable to you. For those of you who invite this person into that world, you do need to be mindful that they may see and judge what's there. I hear some people say, well, they wanted to be my friend. If they see me dancing on tables with margaritas in my hand, then that's what they get for wanting to be friends with me. And I'm thinking, that's not really how it actually works, just so you know. That's a nice idea. Wouldn't that be nice if it were so, that you just get a free pass on Facebook? But we are perceiving and judging, and I don't necessarily mean judging in a bad way. It's just a fact that we take in all that information and process it no matter what. That doesn't stop when the office day ends. Whether or not you're actually even friending with a boss or a client, I'm friends with my colleagues at work, but when I get new clients that I've never really even worked with very much before who friend me, I tend to actually ignore it because it really is there as a social space for me, not because I'm scared they'll see anything they shouldn't, but more it's how I want to experience it. So think about what kind of interaction you do want out of it, and when you open up those doors, actually, I'm going to amend that. Even if you don't open up those doors, you are responsible for your image online, both for the comments or the photos that people leave on your page or on your blog or that they tweet to you or message you or retweet about you. As well as the ones that you send out into the world, because despite privacy protections, good though they often are, you cannot always guarantee that they will work. People can forward things, people can see something over a shoulder, it's not always what you think it is, they change and you didn't realize. It is just worth managing that as though you would be comfortable with somebody from your office seeing something at some point. And that is the place that I see it trending to right now anyhow. Here's an interesting one. This one's a year old. There's been a few other examples, but I actually like this one because it is not a celebrity. This came from a senior vice president at a PR firm in Atlanta while he was driving in a taxi in Memphis to see, he just flown into the airport to see his client FedEx. And he tweeted this out to his followers. True confession, but I'm in one of those towns where I'd scratch my head and say I'd rather die than live here. I'm not sure that's 100% good English, but you get the idea. Guess what happened when he walked into his meeting? People at FedEx were following him, and they had read this tweet. And they were pretty offended. By the time this was done, it was in all the major newspapers and this company's website. This guy actually kept his job, which I think is interesting because some other people don't, as I think we know most recently. This guy kept his job, but there was a full-page mea culpa apology on that firm's webpage. I'm sure that's not exactly productive or profitable for them. I'm sure it's not the kind of press that they were looking to have. Once it's out there, it is out there and can't come back. Aflac, anybody know what I'm talking about? Gilbert Gottfried, he was fired for comments that he said. They were completely inappropriate. I'm not going to excuse his comments. This was he tweeted some comments about the tsunami in Japan after it happened that were really inappropriate. I think he was genuinely sorry, but he lost his job all the same, and somebody else is doing the little duck Aflac voice now. And I think we all know the most famous example that just occurred in Congress, and I don't think it will be the last time we see this. The kicker is that was someone who was apparently known for his tech savvy. Now, whether or not he should have been a little bit more savvy, he was still doing something he shouldn't have been doing. So either way, technology, even when you think you really know what it is, it doesn't always work the way we wish it would. Bottom line, online, the personal brand, the idea that I want people to have of me and my professionalism, those qualities that they can rely on and count on about me, that I am reliable, dependable, that I am trustworthy. If trustworthy is one of, a piece of my personal brand at work, and I'm suddenly relating pieces of gossip on Facebook, how well is that serving my personal brand? Not very well at all, and I probably have some other problems as well going on. But being able to answer this question with a yes is pretty important, I think, in today's world for where we are. I want to mention a few things about some traditional networking as we are moving through the program here. Networking is not just about what happens online. It is still often, and it is often emphasized in business today as a way to build a relationship. I said that was something that's important to us in business today. Well, these are a few ways that you can accomplish that. For some of us, this is as natural as breathing, and it's easy to just sort of network in business all the time, whether it's with somebody you know you'll work with or not. For other people, they feel a little stymied about what is expected of them. We've talked a lot about expectation tonight. These are some of the actions that you can take to be building relationships with people, to be networking with people, even if it's not a formal client that is signed on. The two that I like the best are sending an article to someone else in your industry that you think is interesting, letting them know about a piece of news, not gossip, news, and sharing information about job openings, or maybe even passing along a candidate that you're not using but that you think might be interesting to them. Those are two of the best ways that I've seen to kind of be a part of your industry network. Business social situations. This is not exactly always things that Emily wouldn't have come across, but they are things that our professionals today in the work world are asked to participate in, I think, more and more. To attend at the mixer, to represent the company at the conference. And I don't think that that is going to change, even despite soaring airfares. So it's worth taking a look. This question stymies Americans more than anything else, I think, when it comes to business social. I think you can all read the cartoon that's up here. Talk about not knowing what is expected of us. Americans tend to be fairly uncomfortable in business with social kissing. The on one cheek or the other, or the handshake as you give a little kiss cheek to cheek there. Even hugging, actually, throws some people. Many offices can feel like your family, and that's a really wonderful thing. At Emily Post, it is my family, but even so, we have non-family members there, and they are like family. And there are times that we do hug each other, and that is lovely if I haven't seen you in a long time, or at the end of the Christmas party or something like that, holiday party, excuse me. It is something that isn't wrong, but in business, the standard is not necessarily that it's comfortable for everybody either. So it's worth knowing that pretty much unless you are 100% sure, and there are times you are, but unless you are, stick with the good old classic handshake. If you know there is someone who is going to come at you, arms open, ready for that smooch or ready for that hug, you can preemptively put out the hand when you see them coming. That's okay. You're signaling what you would like as a behavior, and that is fine, fine, fine to do. Europeans, when I'm teaching with Europeans in the room, they often find this fascinating because they're very comfortable with this. But Americans, we like the handshake. You're attending a business social event. You've been talking with somebody who just won't end the conversation. Chatty Cathy has you cornered. What would you do? I get all kinds of answers. I'd go to the restroom. I'd go get a new drink. Okay, that's great, except that I will tell you that several times a year I'll get people raising their hand. I'm seeing somebody nodding right now. What did they do? Did they follow you right there? They followed you right there. And I've heard that both to get the drink, and I have heard that to the restroom. You've had both happen. Yes, okay, good. I'm glad that I am still giving out advice that is accurate right now, or information that's accurate. It doesn't necessarily solve the problem. I'll have people say, oh, excuse me, I see somebody I need to go talk to over here. That can be true. And depending on the scenario, it's not a wrong thing to say, but it can also be translated as, excuse me, I see somebody more important than you that I need to go talk to over here. I'll get people say, oh, let me introduce you to Jim. I'm gonna dump, that's what I call the dump. I'm gonna dump you on Jim. How much is Jim gonna love you? Now, when it's sincere and genuine, and you really wanted this person to meet Jim, then yeah, of course, that's fine, go for it. I'd love to chat more about this. Could I give you a call at the office next week? That can be another way to do it. Can I follow up with you? You just have to be ready to really follow up with that person. I'm also perfectly comfortable with, it's been a pleasure speaking, if you'll excuse me. I like that. It's short and sweet and great, and your body language, kind of as you step back and duck out, can all kind of work with that one for you. The other one that I'll get from people sometimes, and I like, my personal choice is the other one, but I like this one too, is, I'm here to meet some people. Shall we mix, or let's walk around. That's a nice one too. It's going to depend on the situation. Some people really like that one. I prefer short, sweet, simple. At a business lunch, a client with whom you have a good working relationship, this is somebody you know pretty well, tells you about his passion for guns and the constitutional right to bear arms. I'm not coming on sides here. This could go either way. Your personal opinion is exactly the opposite of his, but he presses you for your opinion. What would you do? This one can often spur a lot of debate, but the consensus always falls toward, this is not a conversation I want to engage in. People recognize that we're not probably going to change this person's mind. My goal is to build a relationship with this person. In fact, that probably more than any other agenda is why I'm meeting with them outside of a conference room. That's why this is a business social situation. Meals are a place where we build a relationship further with a client as the priority, even more than the agenda we may have with them. So my goal is the relationship at all costs. It doesn't mean that I have to sacrifice my own thoughts, but one thing that I love is saying, I hadn't thought about that, I'll give it some thought. Or I'll have to consider that. That's an interesting perspective. You can say that without giving up any of your own standing, and it can often be just enough to throw to them that they're willing to back off and back down. That's above my pay grade. We'll have to agree to disagree. Ooh, you know what? That one's a personal one for me. I'm sure you understand. Any variety of those, there's lots, are all ways to shut it down, but being willing to give up the last word in essence, even if you really strongly disagree, because my priority is the relationship, not this. I'm going to put these ones up together, actually, a couple of best business social practices. First one's pretty obvious, golden rule. If somebody's joining your conversation, sort of wrap them into it. Introduce them to the other people. Acknowledge them. Let them know what you were talking about. Introduce with some details about the other person rather than just saying, this is Jen. Saying, oh, this is Jen. She works with HR out of our Orlando office. Start putting people on the map. That's pretty important. Don't make the food or alcohol your priority. This is here for two reasons. One, it is here because if I have in my hand a plate and I have in my hand a glass, what can't I do when I meet someone? Shake hands with them. That's what I'm there to do. I'm there to meet people. If I balance with the plate on top of the glass, as I have heard a few people recommend people do, one, Murphy's Law, it will probably fall apart. And two, even if it doesn't, I look ridiculous. So alternate, food, drink, food, drink. That being said, when I say don't make alcohol the priority, I often in business recommend that people either don't drink at all, that they have one drink, and that they stick to their limit. Now, I know what mine would be. I also know that at a baseball game with a client, you might very reasonably have 2 beers. I recommend 1 drink or none. That being said, set your limit, stick to it, because whether it's 0, 1, or a set your own that you stick to, I recommend the 0, 1, I would never want somebody that I had talked to about business etiquette to find themselves in a position where they were apologizing to a client, a boss, a colleague, a vendor, a supplier because of something that happened because of alcohol. And the worst one that I ever heard, and I know what the details are, but I can't share them. Forgive me for last night. I was obviously out of line. I clearly had too much to drink. What exactly did I do? That's even worse. So, avoid dirty laundry, controversial topics. Dirty laundry, it just doesn't look good to be talking about things that really aren't for all ears, gossip, that kind of a thing. Even if maybe it would be interesting to the other person, save it. It won't look good. It won't read well. Thank your host at the end of the event, or if it's a huge event and you never even met the actual host, thank the person from the company who invited you to be there before you leave. Follow up when appropriate. If you said, oh, let me get your card, I'd like to send you something about that, be sure that you do. The last thing that I want to end with tonight is a little bit on what it means to be a 24/7 professional. Clearly, that's part of life these days when you're expected to respond to emails at home at 10 o'clock at night. Some people are expected to respond to them during dinner with their family, and that is a very difficult thing. I am not a fan of those policies, but I know that some offices have them, that you're available 24/7. One of the things, we also talked about it with social networking here. What I want to do is put up another one that actually could have happened with Emily, but I don't think did. On the way to work, a person cuts you off. You swear and make a rude gesture, which the other driver sees. Later, as you walk in, your new boss comes out to greet you. Let's make it client. Your client comes out to greet you. Your new client comes out to greet you, and you both realize you recognize each other. This is another one where I get some hands going up around the room now and then saying, you know what? That happened to me. A version of that happened to me. This is a very, very common one. In one case, somebody had been texting and had accidentally in traffic bumped the person. They both looked, the guy looks in his mirror and they sort of say, okay, all right, we're going to drive on. And they drive on right into the parking lot and they get out, and that's who they are there to meet with, which can be very awkward. This definitely happens whether it is in a car or another situation. Clearly the answer here is to apologize. One, the obvious point is to be aware that when we are out and about, this can happen. That doesn't mean you go to the grocery store in a three-piece suit. It doesn't mean that if you honk at somebody in traffic, you're in big trouble. It's just something to be aware of for how we do business today. The other part of this that I think is really interesting is a little bit about the building relationships. Obviously, we want to build them. We don't want things that can disrupt them like this. And in this scenario, we'll call it me, I participated in what happened here. So my apology to this person might sound something like, please forgive me, that was what I did earlier was really inappropriate. What I don't then say is, but you did cut me off. That is where I stop. That's not the point. I need to apologize for what I did here. End of story. I might also, depending on how this goes, I might also be saying, I understand if you don't want to meet with me. Can I send somebody else from my office? I might have blown it, but there may be other ways that I can still save a relationship with a company, which is sort of worth thinking about. But what I want to do is, rather than ending on sort of a down note like that, is to give a few last little tip here. Business social situations are kind of a mix of that, but the 24/7 professional idea is really the idea that actions outside of work can affect you. Doesn't mean they will, and it's the idea that you want to be maintaining the highest professional sense when you are traveling for business, when you are sort of there as a business trip and maybe you're going to work at a client site, maybe you're going to a conference. Just because we are in Vegas, this is one time where what happens in Vegas does not necessarily stay in Vegas. So I need to represent my home office well, I need to represent my company well when I'm out and about on the road. Use the principles regardless of what others think. We talked about those earlier. Consideration, respect, honesty. That phrasing, regardless of what others think, is there to get at the idea that nice guys or nice women finish last in business. I don't think that that's true at all. I think that you can be considerate, respectful, honest with people. And I think you can still be assertive while you do that. I prefer that to the word aggressive. I think it is the definition of what it means to be a professional these days as you apply your skills and build your relationships doing these things. I think it will only take you further faster, both in your personal lives and in your professional lives. So with that, I would like to say thank you all. I'd like to wish you a lot of success, and we will move to questions in just a moment. So thank you. I know some folks have to go this evening. For those of you who are staying, the mics will come in from the side. If you can just wait for the microphone to get to you so that everybody can hear the question, that would be terrific. We'll sort of give everyone just a moment to settle here. In fact, while we're sort of settling for a Q&A session, you can find us at emilypost.com, and also we do a daily blog of different questions, etiquettedaily.com. We definitely welcome your voice in that conversation, as well as on our Facebook page, where there's sort of a lot of really lively debate going on sometimes about all different topics, business and otherwise. So I invite you to join there. We also have a newsletter. If anybody would like to be on that, see me and I will add your email address. We do not sell those to people who will send you lots of spam, which is good. All right, so questions. Where can we start? I see one coming up over here. Yep.
I wish my daughter were, son, I wish my daughter were here to hear this, and she obviously isn't. Are there many ways in which you are able to have this message discussed in the larger Dartmouth community with people before they graduate?
That is a fantastic question. Emily Post has worked with Dartmouth for a couple of years now. I did a lecture earlier today, but it is something I've done before and will hopefully do again with the Rockefeller Center here. We also have done junior class dinners, alumni dinners as well. Both myself and my father, Peter, have taught those. And beyond that, I will put that as a question to Dartmouth programming here, because we are nearby. We're in Burlington, Vermont, and we do enjoy the relationship. It's a really great one. And even if programming doesn't happen at a time when she can join, I would certainly encourage her to find us at some of these spots and see the conversations that are going on with it. Absolutely. And by the way, I do teach at a lot of other colleges and universities too. This is a common interest that a lot of them have as a professional development program, preparing students for the workforce, which, you know, for all that I am the purveyor of the product, I also as an individual think is a really good idea. So, questions? Yes.
Your story about the man in Memphis and the Twitter and so forth
Yes.
Causes me to ask, what is it about Twitter that causes normally polite, relatively attentive? In other words, it astonishes me. I have to admit I've never tweeted in my life.
Tweeted.
So therefore, I know you have to take that into account. But I'm sure that gentleman probably wrote in a month hundreds of emails that were perfectly polite,
I bet he
and
did.
yet there was something about that form of communication that caused him to lose his sense.
There's two things that I think you're absolutely spot on with that observation. I think there are two things that start to lend to this happening. One is the immediacy of the medium. It is brief. It's 140 characters or less. So the immediacy isn't just that it immediately goes out, it's that there's only so much you can say. You're not reflecting deeply on what it is that you're putting into this, except maybe changing YOU to U and TWO to the numeral 2 so you can fit it all in there. Beyond that, there's not a lot of deep reflection often going on with Twitter. Sometimes yes, mostly no. So immediacy is part of it. You know, we're not thinking before we act. We're not really thinking a whole lot. It's just poof, it goes out there. That's one contribution to it. The other is the fact that I think there's the illusion that when you're using Twitter, you are looking at a group of peers or friends. And even though you may have more followers than that, you often see it as a personal conversation, because when you're reading it, you're reading the personal pieces. And so you feel when you send it out, it is also personal within a circle. That is really not always the case. Yes, you can have certain settings on Twitter that require people to ask to follow you. But nonetheless, I think there's an illusion of intimacy there that is really quite dangerous, as I think a certain congressman found out very recently. But you're absolutely right, and those are where I think the very nature of it, that immediacy and brevity of it, is part of what allows people to just poof, out it goes. Other questions? Yes. Oh,
Sorry,
no, that's okay. We'll go right here, and then if you can bring a mic up over here as well, we'll be ready for the next question. That would be great. Go ahead.
So I was going to ask, how fast would you say etiquette evolves? The fact that we're not doing the Victorian age elaborate?
Thank goodness.
Is it like a couple generations or?
Depends on what it is.
Yeah.
In some cases, it is a couple of generations. In other cases, it can be very immediate, like the handshakes. I mean, handshakes have been around for centuries. There's different stories about where it comes from. The most common one that I hear about the handshake is that it was combatants in Europe, medieval or further back, and I have a feeling this happened in other cultures too, who would, with their dominant sword hand, rather than having a sword in it, they would extend an empty hand in peace, even the vulnerability of allowing somebody else to touch them. This is where it comes from. It's very, very old. This has been around for a long, long, long time. H1N1 shows up and poof, it's almost out the window in the course of a month. So in that case, something very old might change very quickly. Wedding dresses is another interesting one. Queen Victoria wore a white wedding dress on her wedding to Prince Albert in 1838, 39, 40, forgive me if I don't have that quite right. You get the idea. She wore a white dress. Before that, women simply wore their best dress. And after that, it really became the set thing that you did. And in recent years, with culture changing slowly to the more casual and to more personal expression and to different sort of relationship statuses prior to marriage, I think people really didn't see a lot of that same symbolism in white anymore. And whether they were looking for symbolism or not, just simply the tradition of it with fashion started to change. And you see some, not a lot, but you do see some other colored dresses happening nowadays. So there's a lot that can happen sometimes slowly. Other things we've really held on to quite firmly. Paying the courtesy of a please or a thank you is still here, and I think will be here for a very, very long time. So it really depends on what it is and why it needs to change. Emily had an entire chapter on chaperones in 1922 when she first wrote Etiquette. It moved to a section and a paragraph and a mention, and it was completely gone after the war in 1946. There were no more chaperones anymore. And that was something that had been around for a very, very long time. So the fact that we have so much ability to, between locations and cultures and belief systems, to communicate so quickly these days and to interact, I think is accelerating things a little bit, most often for the good. And it's really interesting to watch technology also play a part in that acceleration and also help us to find some of the things that we really don't want to let go of, like a handwritten thank you note, for example. Even if, one's 8-year-old son isn't thrilled about writing one at the moment, later on in life, they will probably appreciate that as well. So it's fascinating. It's one of my favorite questions about etiquette is why we have certain traditions, why they still matter now, what causes them to start to change. The one that I think should be addressed, and I may draw a little heat for this, is tipping in America. I think is getting out of control. Do I think that servers need to be paid a very livable wage? Absolutely, I do. Tipping, however, when we are talking about, at some point, am I going to write a dinner bill and be tipping somebody 40%? How is that going to equate for the food that's being offered? It's a really interesting question. I'm not necessarily saying that that can't get to that place, but the idea of tipping your hairstylist who wasn't making a whole lot of money, a couple dollars was a great idea, but a colorist who's making $500 a head of hair, do they really need 20% on this anymore? So it's a very interesting relationship that we have with tipping, and I'll be curious to see if anything comes up that causes us to change it. That's my personal thought on that one. That's the one that I have my eye on, but because I want people to be paid appropriately, but it does seem like it's a never-ending slippery slope of increase there. There's a question up here.
How do you recommend dealing with if you are trying to observe etiquette, i.e. my parents gave me the Tiffany Book of Table Manners for Teenagers on my 13th birthday,
Yes.
and upon graduating college, the 17th edition of Emily Post.
Wonderful!
Fully inscribed with my full name and my father's full name. But how would you recommend dealing with when people think you're weird for giving handwritten thank you notes, or saying please and thank you when someone brings in homemade cookies, or smiling at the other people in your office?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I think they're weird if they think you're weird. Those all sound like very nice, normal, courteous things to be doing that, to me, are part of the autopilot of what it means to be part of a society. My recommendation is to stand by your values. You know, I think you're representing all of those principles that we just talked about there, and I really don't think that done wrong, that can get you in trouble. The place where I think, and you're not describing any of it, the place where I think sometimes people react negatively to what they perceive as following etiquette is when people get very stuffy about it, or when they force a situation into a rule of etiquette just because you're supposed to do that, and there's no sort of compassion or life or understanding or that judgment and flexibility that we talked about being applied. And then it doesn't feel so sincere anymore. You know, sincerity is a form of honesty, and when that's lacking, it just doesn't kind of work. You know, we all know the difference between the real deal and the lip service that gets paid. So long as what you're doing, which I have every belief it is, you know, genuine thank you, then it's great. If you're writing somebody a handwritten thank you note for the cookies they brought in, then that's where it might get a little bit weird, but I don't think that's what you're doing. So I would stick to that, because frankly, it really just makes you a nice person, and in a lot of people's eyes, it makes you really classy when you send that handwritten thank you note. That's my take on that one. Question? Yes. Well,
Can I just? I noticed in your talk, you talked about your Facebook page saying that you shouldn't have anything on there that you don't want anyone at work to see. So I guess the question that I have then is, does that, or what it to me implies is that, is it important then that your Facebook page be sterile, or do employers actually do little clandestine things to see what they can find out about you on your
Some
Facebook
employers
page?
do. Some employers take a look at people's pages. Now, if you're not friends with them and you have privacy protections, they're not really going to see very much except for your picture. But even your picture could be enough to paint a picture that you weren't intending to paint. But for me, the question isn't that you can't have anything on it that people at work can see. It's, would you be comfortable if someone from work saw it? And that to me is a little bit of a different question, because no, I don't think it means you have to have a sterile life devoid of any interest. It's more that, and interestingly, the very first place that I saw this being reflected by a younger generation was here at Dartmouth a few summers ago, where when I was talking about some of this, students were saying, yes, you know, I'm on such and such team, sports team, and it's really important to us, since people look to us, that we you know, are sort of representing the school well. So sure, we have our Facebook page and we talk about what book we liked and what movie we just saw and what we're going to do on Friday night and all kinds of things like this. But in fact, Facebook on a whole is trending a little bit more toward the open in that sense. Initially, people would have photos up there that were inappropriate. There was that you wouldn't want somebody from work to see, and then all of a sudden someone from work saw it somehow. Doesn't even matter how, but they saw it, and it was a problem. That's where some of it came from. People were saying things on blogs about their work. That was a problem. This isn't always just about Facebook. There's a lot of companies have policies about this now. Some companies even hire people full-time to troll the internet looking for things. These are big companies for things that people, their own employees, have said about the company. So it's more about understanding that this isn't as opaque a wall. It's more transparent than we realize. You can still have lots of personality within that, just the way you can in your office, but I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't let you know that that is much more mutable of a wall than it used to be, and just to be prepared for that. Be prepared to answer yes to this question. Can you have photos from your birthday party up? Yes, absolutely. One of the things that came, initial urban legend, I'd love to find if this is real, was, this tells you how old it is, was when MySpace was the really dominant social media platform. And it was a woman, the story goes, she worked in finance in New York, Wall Street, high finance, and she went in for a job interview at one of the really big firms, and they said, so you're really committed to being here and to having this job? And she said, yes, absolutely, this is what I want to do. And they said, so how come you're part of a group she just probably checked yes to something that she thought was funny someone sent her that said, future rich housewife of America. And she probably just thought it was a joke. But to them, they said, why should we take you seriously as a candidate? So there's some things like that, some places like that, stories like that, that are where this idea of, well, maybe there are some things I don't put on there. I have occasionally deleted a comment that a friend has left on Facebook because I just don't feel comfortable with it. And you get to control that level of image that you have on there. And in part, people complain a lot that Facebook is all sort of contrived and it's your image as you like to see it, and that's very true. And this is one instance where it's actually really working in your favor, that you do have the ability to control some of that. You can untag from photos. You can delete comments if you don't think it's something you feel comfortable being associated with. That's an okay thing to do. I saw a hand coming up over here.
I don't normally comment, but we had a local student that was actually accepted into a college and placed something on Facebook, and the college actually told them that they could not come to the school. So, I mean, it's gotten to that point where it is actually almost really critical that even young people are a little bit more aware of what they're doing and saying and placing on Facebook, because it changed his life.
Yeah, very much so. It's not the first story I've heard like that about it. And right or wrong, most of the corporations and even a lot of universities that I've worked with and talked to, I usually just ask, do you have a policy, an HR policy? Do you look at Facebook pages? When I talk with them about whether this is part of the program, and the answer more often than not is yes. In fact, I think these days it's pretty much always yes. Question here, and then we'll come right over here.
This is actually kind of another history one. So why did all these elaborate Victorian rituals and say when the marriage happened over in England, why are those around? Is it mainly just to separate the classes, or?
In some cases, they were to separate classes. In a lot of cases in the Victorian, and I'm not a complete expert in this, but it is of deep personal, professional interest, a lot of them came from a desire to be delicate and refined and dainty and things like that. It's why when you set the table and you have your fork on the left-hand side and you have your knife and your spoon on the right, the knife, the blade, even though it's a butter knife, for crying out loud, it can barely cut butter half the time unless you soften it up, is facing in toward the plate, so that it doesn't have, actually that tradition may even be older than Victorian, but the idea is that from a time when those blades were sharp, sort of scissor safety of the Middle Ages, if you will, non-aggression at the table, that the blade is in toward you. There is a tradition in America of eating, and you can eat either way now, it's fine, but the continental style you would eat like this. The American style you would eat and sit down and only ever bring food to your mouth with the right hand. I've heard a variety of places that came from, one of which is that you wanted to touch the knife as little as possible because the knife was a violent instrument. So some of this was coming from a desire to be very, what they considered sort of delicate about things in general. They were also looking, in some cases, whether they did it intentionally or not, to, yes, differentiate by class. One of the greatest compliments I think was ever paid to Emily Post was that her book was called the most democratizing book of the 20th century, because she told everybody what was what. No matter who you were or what you wanted to know, everybody could know it. She was part of society, yes, but she didn't see why it had to be so stuffy and uptight and why it had to be so full of impractical rules. She was a very practical woman, and I think that with industry came a desire to be more direct with people. And as classes started changing, people started seeing through some of that kind of false structure, if you will. I know I'm kind of getting a little bit deep there for a moment, but it is interesting that that's where a lot of it was coming from. The white dress, whether Victoria meant it or not, it very quickly became a symbol of virginity, for example. Again, that interest in sanitizing anything sexual in their society. So there's a lot of things like that came out of that era that we are still deciding if we want to be part of the culture that we have now.
Getting back to Facebook, I have heard about an interesting situation where an employee on Facebook was advertising going to a concert, and other employees had heard about this. And then the supervisor found out that this individual, well, the supervisor was asked for time off due to a doctor's appointment. Does that kind of get into a sticky wicket? I mean,
So-
what would have been the appropriate professional response?
We'll call them Bob. Bob has been talking on Facebook about how Bob is going to a concert. That concert would require work time off, and Bob goes to his employer and says, or Bob goes to his employer and says, oh, I'm sick today, I can't come into work. But the employer says, that's funny, I thought you were going to a concert, because that's what I heard about on Facebook. That is exactly the kind of thing that we are talking about here. One, that's deceitful. I'm not a fan of the honesty. We probably shouldn't be doing it anyway. But just on a functional level, probably shouldn't have put that on Facebook. Now, probably shouldn't be doing it in the first place, but as an example, yeah, that's a very good one about how that work life, that idea of being a 24/7 professional, that work life is intersecting in ways that you might not have realized when you were just looking to be connecting with friends. So yeah, that's a great example. It's not the first one I've heard like that either, so. People outing themselves on Facebook for things they shouldn't have been doing on work time. Or people tweeting, gosh, I'm sitting at my desk, I'm so bored right now. And then the boss realizes and says, oh, really? I can give you a few things to be doing. So there's a lot of those that I have heard about, including one from a woman that I did a book signing for, who one of her employees she had seen on Facebook had written, oh, gosh, I really don't want to go to work today. And she's sort of thinking, I'm your boss. I feel really quite awkward reading that and hearing you say that. True though it may be, and a natural thing that we might want to vent to a spouse or a friend or a roommate or something like that, it doesn't mean you can't have a feeling like that. It just means, was this the place to express it when part of your world is people who probably shouldn't hear that, just to be appropriate to the relationship there. Any other questions? Yes, right up here. I think we'll do the last question because we're right about at 6:30.
So I have a question about email correspondence.
Yes.
So naturally, when you start professional communication with someone, you address them very formally, like Miss or Mr. And when they reply, sometimes they sign the email with their first name only. Would it be appropriate to write the second email addressing them with their first name, or should I continue?
It absolutely would be appropriate to write back that way. If I were to sign my email Anna Post, you would probably write again, Dear Ms. Post. I always sign them Anna because that's what I like to be called by anybody at any time. You may all call me Anna. And when you see that sign, that's sort of tacit approval to, yes, please call me Anna. Yes.
But isn't that opposite when you're a student with your professors? Because they tell us here never to write that with the professor, because professors often sign with their first name or with their initials or something other than what we call them.
You are also correct, and you said the key ingredient in there. We are told not to do that with professors. There is a manner, an expectation that is set as part of the culture here at Dartmouth that you've been told about. And so that is what you should look to, absolutely. If you had not been told that at your university or your college, then I think it might be a little bit more confusing what you should do. Talk about another place where generationally things are changing. And I remember calling some professors by their first name and some professors by their last name and title when I was at college, and I sort of just had to remember who was who and who I should do that with. Whereas I actually really like that there's a policy set by the school as an expectation so that you don't have to sit there wondering what's appropriate. You just simply know and can do it regardless of what that person signs. I think that sometimes when we do have expectations like that, it isn't making things more stuffy, it's sometimes making them easier. It's why a lot of offices are moving away from casual Fridays these days, because people are so confused about what it actually means or how to participate appropriately that having that expectation of what I should put on to wear, let alone now having to have more clothes that I keep in nice condition for work, a lot of offices are doing away with it because it makes for an easier expectation for employees. And sometimes that's not a bad thing. Sometimes it's a really nice direction to have. It's going to depend on the corporate culture. So with that, that's the last question that we'll take for tonight. Thank you all again for being here. I really appreciate all of your participation and all of your questions and conversation. If anyone has any other questions afterward, I will be here for a little bit. So thank you and have a great weekend.